The dust, the color of dried blood, clung to Alara's torn shift, caked in the rivulets of sweat and tears that carved paths down her skin. Each lash of the rawhide whip was a searing punctuation mark to the pronouncements of Silas Blackwood, the man she had refused. His voice, slick with piety and possession, echoed across the stunned silence of the town square, each word a stone cast. "Let this be a lesson," he declared, his shadow falling long and distorted in the brutal sun, "to any woman who forgets her place, her duty." Alara's world had shrunk to the splintered wood of the post against her cheek, the fire racing across her back, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Her refusal had been quiet, a desperate plea for autonomy in a world that offered none. Now, her defiance was being flayed from her, layer by layer, before the hungry eyes of Havenwood. Her vision blurred, the faces in the crowd a shifting mosaic of pity, fear, and grim satisfaction. Hope was a dying ember, smothered beneath the weight of public shame and agonizing pain. She could feel the raw flesh, the sticky warmth of her own blood. Her fingers, bound tight, clenched uselessly. She would not scream. That small, internal rebellion was all she had left. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers, a sigh of collective tension as the thud of the whip became sickeningly regular. Blackwood, portly and self-important, watched from the porch of the general store, a glass of whiskey in hand, his lips curled in a satisfied smirk. He owned this town, its mayor, its preacher, its soul. And he had meant to own her. From the shadowed alleyway between the smithy and the undertaker's, a figure watched, still as granite. He was tall, dust-covered from a long ride, his face unreadable beneath the brim of a wide hat. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing, Alara's trembling endurance, Blackwood's preening cruelty, the way the sheriff nervously fingered his star but did nothing. This was not his business, yet the scene resonated with a discordant note, a familiar ugliness he'd encountered too many times before in too many barren places. He saw not a defiant bride, but a spirit being systematically broken, and a cold, quiet anger began to smolder within him, banked deep but burning steadily. As Alara's strength ebbed, her body sagging against the ropes, a new silence fell, heavier than before. The whipper, a brutish man named Jeb, paused, his arm raised for another blow. It was then the stranger moved. Not with haste, but with a deliberate, measured pace that drew every eye. He walked into the sun-baked square, his worn leather duster shifting with his stride, spurs whispering a soft, metallic song against the sudden hush. He stopped not before Blackwood, but before the exhausted whipper. "That's enough," he said, his voice low, calm, yet carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the oppressive heat. Jeb, startled, looked towards Blackwood for direction. Blackwood scowled, his pleasure interrupted. "Who in blazes are you to interfere?" he boomed, stepping forward. "This is town justice, stranger." For a disobedient, runaway, the stranger turned his gaze to Blackwood, a gaze that was flat, unwavering. "I know what it is," he stated, cutting off Blackwood's tirade. He then addressed the sheriff, who shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff, I'll take responsibility for the woman." A gasp went through the crowd. Blackwood's face purpled. "Responsibility? She's my betrothed. My property, tarnished as she is." The stranger's eyes flicked back to Blackwood. "She don't look like property that's been cherished. More like abused." He paused, then added, "Silas Blackwood, isn't it? Heard you had some debts over in Carson City. Gambling, I recall. Man named Finnegan was looking for you." A Blackwood's bluster faltered, a flicker of unease in his eyes. The stranger didn't wait for a reply. He produced a worn leather pouch. "Consider her bride price paid, or your debt settled. Your choice." He tossed the pouch onto the dusty ground between them. It landed with a heavy thud. "Or perhaps you'd prefer I discuss Mr. Finnegan's temper with him next time I see him." The implication, unspoken, hung heavy. Blackwood, caught between greed, public face, and a sudden, visceral fear of this unknown man and his connections, hesitated. The weight of the pouch was tempting. The threat, more so. He glared at Alara, then at the stranger. "Take the damaged goods then," he spat, trying to regain some semblance of control. "She's more trouble than she's worth." He gestured curtly to Jeb. "Cut her down." The stranger, Kalen moved before Jeb could, his knife appearing as if by magic, slicing through the ropes with swift precision. Ilara crumpled, but he was there, catching her gently, his arms surprisingly strong, supporting her broken form. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, her blood staining his duster. The crowd parted, their earlier curiosity replaced by awe and a touch of fear. As Kalen carried her away, Ilara, through a haze of pain, saw Blackwood's face, contorted with impotent rage and the sting of public emasculation. Then, only the rhythmic creak of Kalen's leather and the steady beat of his heart against her ear as darkness claimed her. The journey was a blur, punctuated by the gentle sway of a horse and the surprisingly soft bedroll Kalen had fashioned for her in a wagon he'd evidently left at the edge of town. When Ilara next surfaced to full awareness, she was lying on a narrow but comfortable bed, the scent of herbs and clean linen filling her nostrils. Sunlight, muted by a calico curtain, painted soft stripes across a wooden floor. The room was simple, rustic, yet impeccably clean. A stone fireplace, cold now, dominated one wall. Her back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but the searing agony had lessened. She gingerly touched her shoulder, her wounds had been cleaned and dressed with a soothing salve. She was wearing a soft, oversized cotton shirt that was not her own. Fear, cold and familiar, pricked at her. Where was she? Who was this man? Kalen entered then, moving with a quietness that belied his size. He carried a tray with a bowl of broth, a piece of bread, and a tin cup of water. He set it on a small table beside the bed without a word, his expression unreadable. His eyes, though, those winter sky eyes, held no malice, only a distant sort of observation. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 40, his face weathered by sun and wind, etched with lines that spoke of hard miles and harder decisions. He gestured to the tray. "Eat," he said, his voice still low, a rumble that didn't demand, but suggested. He didn't stay to watch her, retreating to the main room of the modest ranch house. Ilara, wary but driven by a desperate hunger, slowly sat up, wincing. The broth was warm, savory. The silence of the place was profound, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle or the sigh of wind through unseen pines. Days melted into a routine. Kalen would bring her food, change her dressings with an impersonal efficiency that was nonetheless gentle, and then leave her to her solitude. He never asked her name, never asked about Blackwood, never spoke of what happened in the square. He chopped wood, mended fences, rode out to check his stock, his presence a steady, unobtrusive rhythm in the vast landscape that surrounded the isolated homestead. He was a man of few words, but his actions built a tentative bridge of safety. He had bought her, yes, but he made no claims. He had saved her, but he expected no gratitude. His silence, initially terrifying, became a sanctuary. In it, Ilara began the slow, painful process of piecing together the fragments of herself, the raw edges of her trauma slowly beginning to scar over, not yet heal, but scar. The internal landscape of Ilara's mind was, for weeks, a storm-tossed sea. Nightmares replayed the scene in the square, Blackwood's leering face, the sting of the whip, the jeering, pitiless eyes of the crowd. During the day, a listless fog often enveloped her. Who was she now? The woman they called Ilara in Havenwood, the disobedient bride, felt like a shed skin, a painful memory belonging to someone else. Yet, no new identity had emerged to take its place. She was adrift. Kalen's quiet consistency was an anchor. He expected nothing. He simply was. One morning, the aroma of coffee, rich and dark, drew her from her room. She found Kalen by the stove, pouring 2 cups. He glanced at her, then gestured to the second cup. A silent offering. She took it, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, the words rusty in her throat. He merely nodded, taking his own cup to the porch. She watched him through the open doorway, a silhouette against the rising sun, staring out at the vast expanse of his land. It was a harsh beauty, this place, rugged hills, sparse trees, a sky that stretched to infinity. Yet, there was a sense of peace here, a resilience in the way the wild grasses bent before the wind but did not break. Slowly, tentatively, Ilara began to venture further than her room, First, the main room of the small cabin, then the porch. The sun on her skin felt foreign, then comforting. She observed Kalen's interactions with his animals, a few sturdy horses, a small herd of cattle. He moved among them with a calm respect, his hands gentle but firm. There was a language there, unspoken, between man and beast, a harmony she'd never witnessed. One afternoon, she found a discarded piece of mending by the hearth, a canvas bag with a torn strap. Without thinking, she picked it up, found a needle and coarse thread in a tin Kalen kept on a shelf, and began to repair it. Her stitches were clumsy at first, but the simple, repetitive action was soothing. When Kalen returned and saw her work, he said nothing, but the next day a small basket with more mending supplies appeared on the table beside her chair. It was a silent acknowledgement, perhaps even an approval. A flicker of something, not quite purpose, but a lessening of the crushing weight of helplessness, stirred within her. She was still afraid, still bore the physical and emotional scars, but a tiny, stubborn seed of survival was beginning to push through the barren soil of her despair. The rhythm of the ranch became the rhythm of Ilara's healing. She began to help, unasked. At first, it was small things, sweeping the cabin floor, tending the meager vegetable patch Kalen had planted near the well. He accepted her contributions with the same quiet gravity he applied to everything else. If she fumbled, he might offer a brief, practical suggestion: hold the hoe lower, less strain on your back, but never criticism. His teaching was by example, by the quiet efficiency of his own labor. He knew this land, it was in his bones. He showed her, often without words, how to read the sky for weather, how to find water, which plants were useful and which were dangerous. She learned to identify the calls of different birds, the tracks of unseen animals in the dust. The physical work was demanding, her muscles aching in protest initially, but with each passing day, she felt a sliver of strength returning, not just to her body, but to her spirit. The sun browned her skin, the wind tangled her hair, and the vast, silent landscape began to feel less like a prison and more like a shield. She found a strange solace in the solitude, a stark contrast to the suffocating scrutiny of Havenwood. Here, under the immense sky, her past horrors seemed to shrink, dwarfed by the scale of the wilderness. One evening, as they sat on the porch, a rare moment of shared stillness after the day's work, Kalen was cleaning his rifle. The methodical, precise movement spoke of long familiarity. Ilara noticed a scar on his forearm, pale and jagged against his tanned skin, disappearing beneath his sleeve. It wasn't the only one she'd glimpsed. His past was a closed book, its pages filled with experiences she couldn't imagine. He never spoke of it, and she never asked. But these silent markers hinted at a life lived on the edge, a life that had perhaps also known profound loss or violence. It made his current gentleness, his quiet protection of her, all the more remarkable. He was a man of deep, hidden currents, his stoicism a wall around a core she was only beginning to sense. He was not just a rescuer, but a survivor himself, in ways she might never understand. This unspoken kinship, this shared understanding of pain and resilience, forged a bond stronger than words. One sweltering afternoon, a lone rider approached the ranch. Not a threat, just a grizzled trapper Kalen knew, stopping for water and news. Ilara, drawing water from the well, retreated into the shadows of the cabin, her heart suddenly hammering. The trapper's voice carried, rough and loud, as he shared gossip from the settlements further east. He mentioned Havenwood. That Blackwood fella, the trapper chuckled, oblivious to her presence, heard his still sour as a pickle. Made a fool of himself over some runaway gal. Swears he'll find her, make her pay proper. The casual cruelty of the words, the reminder that Silas Blackwood still existed, still harbored his venomous intent, sent a chill through Ilara despite the heat. The carefully constructed piece of the past months felt fragile, threatened. She saw Kalen's posture stiffen slightly as he listened, his face impassive. He offered the trapper a noncommittal grunt and changed the subject. When the trapper finally rode on, Kalen found Ilara inside, her hands clenched, her breathing shallow. The old fear was back, a cold hand squeezing her heart. He didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he took a whetstone and began to sharpen a knife, the rhythmic shink-shink of steel on stone a strangely calming sound in the tense silence. His focus was absolute, his presence a solid, unshakable thing. After a long while, he looked at her, his gaze direct. "Fear's a shadow, girl. It only has power if you stand in its darkness." It was the most he'd said to her on such a personal matter. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The trapper's words echoed. Blackwood was still out there. But Kaylin's words echoed too. She rose from her bed, dressing in the dim moonlight that filtered through her window. She crept outside, to the woodpile where the axe lay. Hesitantly at first, then with growing determination, she began to swing it, not at wood, but at the phantom shapes of her fear. The movements were awkward, exhausting, but with each swing, a measure of the terror receded, replaced by a burgeoning, righteous anger. She would not be a shadow. She would not be his victim again. She would learn to stand in the light, however harsh it might be. Kaylin, watching from the darkened doorway of the cabin, said nothing. A faint, almost imperceptible softening touched the corners of his mouth. The name Ilara felt like a brand seared into her memory, a name whispered with contempt in Havenwood, a name tied to humiliation and pain. It was the name of the woman who had been whipped, the woman who had been broken. But she was not that woman anymore. The sun and wind and hard work had scoured away layers of that old self, revealing something new, something stronger beneath. She needed a name that reflected this change, a name that was hers alone, chosen, not given in subservience. She thought of the hawk she often saw circling high above the ranch, its cry wild and free. She thought of the tough, resilient desert flowers that bloomed against all odds. One evening, as the sky bled into hues of purple and orange, she sat with Kaylin on the porch. The silence between them was comfortable now, a shared space rather than an empty one. "Kaylin," she began, her voice quiet but firm. He turned his gaze from the horizon to her. "I am not Ilara anymore," he waited, his stillness an invitation to continue. "My name is Lyra," she said, the word feeling right, resonant. Lyra, like the constellation, a beacon in the darkness, like the lyrebird, possessing a voice of its own. A name of strength and song. Kaylin considered her, his expression thoughtful. He nodded slowly. "Lyra," he repeated, the sound of it natural on his tongue. "It's a good name." Strong, that was all. No questions, no surprise, just simple, profound acceptance. And in that moment, Ilara truly became Lyra. It was as if a heavy cloak had been lifted from her shoulders. She sat taller, her gaze more direct. The fear was still there, a faint tremor deep inside, but it no longer defined her. Lyra. She practiced the name in her mind, let it settle into her bones. It was a shield and a banner. The woman named Lyra would not break. The woman named Lyra would fight. The days that followed saw a subtle shift. She moved with more confidence, her voice, when she spoke, clearer, less hesitant. She took on more responsibilities around the ranch, not as a drudge, but as a partner, learning to ride, to track, even to handle a small rifle Kaylin cautiously began to teach her to use for hunting, his instructions spare but precise. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing. For what, she wasn't entirely sure, but a sense of readiness was growing within her, a quiet determination that mirrored Kaylin's own. He watched her transformation, a silent witness, his respect for her growing with each passing day. He had offered sanctuary to a broken bird, now, he saw an eagle testing its wings. The peace was shattered on a crisp autumn morning. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, not the meandering approach of a trapper, but the purposeful, arrogant advance of men with ill intent. Lyra, mending a fence line some distance from the cabin, saw them first. Her heart leaped into her throat, but this time, the fear was shot through with a cold, clear anger. One of the riders was unmistakable, even at a distance, Silas Blackwood, heavier now, his face flushed with malice. Kaylin, working near the barn, had seen them too. He straightened, his body instantly alert, his hand dropping almost unconsciously to the Colt at his hip. He didn't shout an alarm, his stillness was alarm enough. Lyra dropped her tools and ran towards the cabin, not in panic, but with a focused urgency. "It's Blackwood," she called, her voice carrying clearly, without a tremor. Kaylin met her at the porch. Inside, Lyra. Stay down. His words were curt, an order. But Lyra shook her head. No. I won't hide. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds now, met his. This is my fight too. Kaelin looked at her for a long moment, so the unwavering resolve in her gaze, the set of her jaw. He saw not Elara, the victim, but Lyra, the survivor. He gave a curt nod. All right. But do as I say. The Blackwood and his 2 hired men reined in before the ranch house, their horses kicking up dust. Blackwood's eyes, cruel and possessive, fixed on Lyra. A sneer spread across his face. Well, well. Look what the buzzards didn't eat. Found yourself a new protector, have you, girl? He spat on the ground. I've come for what's mine. Kaelin stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Lyra and Blackwood. She's not yours, Blackwood. She never was. His voice was deceptively mild, yet it held the chilling promise of winter ice. This is my property, Kaelin continued, his gaze sweeping over the intruders, and you're trespassing. One of Blackwood's men, a lanky fellow with shifty eyes, laughed uneasily. Just hand over the woman, old man, and we'll be on our way. No need for trouble. Lyra stepped out from behind Kaelin, her chin high. I am not a piece of property to be handed over, she said, her voice ringing with a strength that surprised even herself. And my name is Lyra. You will address me as such, if you address me at all. Blackwood's eyes bulged, his face turning a mottled red. The defiance, the calm assertion from the woman he had publicly humiliated, was more than he could bear. You insolent whore. You'll learn respect when I drag you back to Havenwood by your hair. Blackwood's hand went to the whip coiled at his saddle, a symbol of his remembered power over her. But before he could unloop it, Kaelin moved. It wasn't a fast draw, not in the showy way of dime novels, but a movement of pure, deadly economy. His Colt was in his hand, leveled, before Blackwood's fingers even tightened on the rawhide. I wouldn't, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a lethal softness. The 2 hired guns tensed, their own hands hovering near their holsters. The air crackled with unspoken violence. There's 3 of us, old man, sneered the lanky one, though his bravado was visibly strained. And one of him, Lyra stated, her voice cutting through the tension. Then, with a speed that shocked them all, she raised the small rifle Kaelin had taught her to use. It wasn't aimed at Blackwood, but at the ground near the feet of the lanky man's horse. She fired. The shot was deafening in the sudden silence. The horse shied violently, nearly unseating its rider. The 2nd hired man, startled, drew his weapon clumsily. Kaelin's Colt barked once. The man cried out, clutching his shoulder, his gun spinning into the dust. It happened in heartbeats. Blackwood sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had come expecting a cowering woman and perhaps a reluctant farmer. He found instead a warrior and a woman forged in fire. You were saying, Blackwood. Kaelin's voice was calm, but his eyes were glacial. Blackwood stared at Lyra, at the rifle steady in her hands, at Kaelin, an immovable force. The arrogance drained from him, replaced by a dawning, terrified understanding. He had miscalculated. Badly. This isn't over, he stammered, trying to salvage some dignity, but his voice was thin, reedy. Lyra spoke then, her words precise and cold. Oh, I think it is, Silas. You have no power here. You have no power over me anymore. Leave. And if you ever come near this place, or think my name again, Kaelin won't be so restrained. And neither will I. The threat in her voice was palpable, backed by the unwavering barrel of her rifle and the deadly stillness of the man beside her. The remaining conscious henchman, nursing his shock, looked at Blackwood, then at Kaelin and Lyra, and made a swift decision. He wheeled his horse and galloped away without a word. Blackwood, alone, defeated, his face contorted in a mask of humiliation and rage, finally turned his horse. He cast one last venomous glare at Lyra. You'll regret this, he hissed. I already regret not seeing you hang, Kaelin replied, his tone flat. Blackwood kicked his horse into a desperate retreat, vanishing over the rise, a diminished, pathetic figure. Lyra lowered her rifle, her hands trembling slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. Kalen gently took the rifle from her. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not just approval, but a deep, profound respect. The shadow had returned, and they had faced it together. And it had been banished. A year passed, then another. The seasons turned, painting Kalen's land in the harsh hues of summer and the soft pastels of spring. The incident with Blackwood faded, not from memory, but from the forefront of their lives, becoming another story woven into the fabric of the ranch. Lyra was no longer the haunted woman Kalen had rescued. The scars on her back had faded to pale lines, testament to a past endured, not a present defined. Her spirit, once so brutally assailed, had not only healed but had grown resilient, deeply rooted like the ancient junipers on the hillsides. She moved with a quiet confidence, her eyes clear, her hands capable. She and Kalen worked the ranch together, a partnership built on unspoken understanding and mutual respect. Their silences were companionable, filled with the rhythm of shared tasks and the vast quiet of the land. There was a deep, abiding affection between them, a bond forged in crisis and tempered by time, unique and unconstrained by conventional labels. It was a love born of shared solitude and bedrock loyalty. News of Blackwood's downfall, though not its precise details, had trickled through the territories. Some said he'd lost his standing in Havenwood, his bluster deflated. Others whispered he'd met a grim end further west, tangling with the wrong kind of men, perhaps even those Kalen had so casually mentioned. Lyra never asked for confirmation. His power over her was broken, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes, a new face would appear at the ranch, a drifter seeking work, a family moving west with a broken wagon wheel, occasionally a woman fleeing a situation not unlike Lyra's own. Kalen would offer what help he could, gruffly but fairly. And Lyra, seeing a reflection of her past self in their frightened eyes, would offer a quieter kindness, a cup of water, a mended seam, a few words of encouragement. She never told her full story, but her presence, her quiet strength, was a testament to survival, a silent beacon of hope. The ranch became known, in hushed tones, as a place of sanctuary, a refuge on the hard edge of the frontier. Lyra, the woman who had once been publicly shamed, became a quiet legend, her name whispered with respect by those who knew a fraction of her journey. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery glory, Lyra stood on the porch, watching the colors fade. Kalen came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He didn't speak, simply handed her a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a wren, small but fiercely tenacious. He'd been working on it in secret for weeks. Lyra took it, her fingers tracing the delicate lines. Her eyes met his, filled with an emotion too deep for words. Here, in this wild, unforgiving land, she had found not just safety, but a home, a purpose, and herself. She was Lyra, the survivor, the strong, her spirit as vast and untamed as the land she now called her own. And in the quiet strength of the man beside her, she saw the enduring power of kindness in a brutal world.